Good morning. My name is Caleb. I'm so glad and honored to be able to come up here and to speak today. We're starting Christmas. Well, I've been starting Christmas. I've been saying Merry Christmas since like November 1st. That's just kind of the way I'm built, and so that's how I do it. So I'm really excited about the Christmas series, and Christmas at Redemption would not be complete without Christmas Eve at Redemption, and so I did want to highlight that. December 24th, we have 3 service times to choose from, 1 p.m., 2:30 p.m., and 4 p.m. It's really Christmas afternoon Eve at Redemption Church, but it gives you a chance to go home and spend Christmas Eve with your family, but we always have a lot of fun on Christmas Eve, fun for the whole family. It's exciting. We always have something unique and special planned. Last year we had Luke, the writer Luke, coming up, and he gave the gospel. He presented the Gospel of Luke, chapter 1 and 2. And this year we have something really special that we hope that you guys would be a part of. So again, December 24th, 1, 2:30, and 4 p.m. But as Matt said, we're starting Christmas. We're going through Matthew chapter 1. We're going to be in the Gospel of Matthew for 2, 3, 4 decades. I don't know. It's really long. We're going to go in and out of Matthew throughout seasons, but we're going to start in Matthew chapter 1. We normally have a video that reads the scripture over us. We do not have that today, so I'm going to do my best to read the genealogy, and if I mispronounce any words, Brandon taught them to me. So here's how we're going to go. The book of the genealogy of Jesus Christ, the son of David, the son of Abraham. Abraham was the father of Isaac, and Isaac the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Judah and his brothers, and Judah the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar, and Perez the father of Hezron, and Hezron the father of Ram, and Ram the father of Amminadab, and Amminadab the father of Nahshon, and Nahshon the father of Salmon, and Salmon the father of Boaz by Rahab, and Boaz the father of Obed by Ruth, and Obed the father of Jesse, and Jesse the father of David the king. David was the father of Solomon by the wife of Uriah, and Solomon the father of Rehoboam, and Rehoboam the father of Abijah, and Abijah the father of Asaph, Asaph the father of Jehoshaphat, and Jehoshaphat the father of Joram, and Joram the father of Uzziah, and Uzziah the father of Jotham, and Jotham the father of Ahaz, and Ahaz the father of Hezekiah. We're getting there. Hang on, we're getting there. Hezekiah the father of Manasseh, and Manasseh the father of Amos, and Amos the father of Josiah, and Josiah the father of Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. And after the deportation to Babylon, Jeconiah was the father of Shealtiel, and Shealtiel the father of Zerubbabel, and Zerubbabel the father of Abiud, and Abiud the father of Eliakim, and Eliakim the father of Azor. Their trick is to read it fast and confidently. That way people think you know what you're talking about. And Azor the father of Zadok, and Zadok the father of Achim, and Achim the father of Eliud, and Eliud the father of Eleazar, and Eleazar the father of Matan, Matan the father of Jacob, and Jacob the father of Joseph, the husband of Mary, of whom Jesus was born, who is called the Christ. So all the generations from Abraham to David were 14 generations. From David to the deportation to Babylon, 14 generations, and from the deportation to Babylon to the Christ, 14 generations. Thank you. Brandon was like, hey, would you like to start the Christmas series? I was like, yeah, sure. What am I preaching on? The Hebrew phone book. That's what you're going to do, right? Right? Who in here is really into genealogies? Anybody really into their genealogies? Truth be told, I'm not really very much. Like, I know you can pay the money and go to the websites and swab the mouth and do all that stuff, and I think that's how you do it, right? Typically, when we bump up against the genealogy in the Bible, we have a tendency to skim it or maybe even skip it altogether. Unless you're like, I have a baby on the way and I need to know a Bible verse, or I need to know a Bible name, so let me just, all right, Solomon, perfect. My kid's going to be named Solomon. I wish we could have started on verse 18. Now, the birth of Jesus Christ took place in this way. There we go. Let's just get started. You're like, why am I starting off with a snoozer? Why am I starting off with the genealogy? Why is Matthew starting off with the genealogy? We might think that's odd, but the past couple of weeks I've been reading some commentaries on this and listening to a couple of different sermons on this particular genealogy, and there's a reason why Matthew does this. In this genealogy is everything that you and I need to know about Christianity. All the essentials of Christianity and the Christian life are in this list of names. The first thing that I want us to grab hold of is this, that the gospel is not good advice, it is good news. This is what this genealogy teaches us. The gospel is not simply just good advice. It's actually good news. I love a good story. I love a good opening title credit scene to a good movie. I like the Marvel movies. You have the comic book pages flipping as the Marvel is appearing, and don't call me right now. My phone's on silent, but if you were to call me, it'd be the Avengers opening title credits scene. That's my phone ringtone. Star Wars, you have that. You can see that in your mind, the Star Wars going away and the title crawl. A good opening story starts with once upon a time or a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. And you'd think with the birth of Jesus, that's how Matthew would do it. Matthew doesn't do it that way, though. Instead, he starts off with the genealogy, but what he's reminding us, what he's teaching us, is he's saying, I'm going to tell you what actually happened, who it happened to, and when it happened. The most important feature about Christianity is that it's actual history. The core of Christianity is not a set of principles and rules and teachings that Jesus taught. The core of Christianity is about something that Jesus did. Most religions, if you really study them, you peel back the layers of those religions, they're basically set on a list of principles, rules, teachings. Like Buddhism, for example. Whether or not Buddha is real is not the crux of Buddhism. The crux of Buddhism is there's these principles that undergird the universe. And this is what you have to believe to be Buddhist. Islam is simply a pattern for the way Allah has told us to live. Regardless of whether or not Muhammad was really a prophet, it's not as important as, are you living the Islamic life? Are you living the life that Allah has asked you to live? And that's not true for Christianity. Christianity depends on a set of events that actually took place in time and history, because the core of Christianity is not about D-O, it is about D-O-N-E. Christianity is not about what we do, it's about what has been done. The Gospels, the 4 books that make up the beginning of the New Testament, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, they contain the teachings of Jesus, but they're essentially prologues to the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. It's basically skims over 33 years of Jesus' life and focuses on this final week, the thing that Jesus came to do, which is to go to the cross, bear the penalty for our sins, and rise again. John's gospel is 18 chapters long, and 6 of those chapters are focused on that 1 week. Matthew's gospel is 28 chapters long. 5 of them are focused on just that 1 week. The gospel is, there's principles, there's rules, there's teachings, but that's not the core of Christianity. The core of Christianity is not about what Jesus taught us, it's about what Jesus did for us. That's why I say the gospel is not primarily good advice, the gospel is good news. The word gospel itself, it's actually kind of this amalgamation of 2 Greek words, euangelion. EU meaning good and gelion meaning message. The gospel is a good message. It's good news for us. In ancient Rome, when they would go to conquer the known world, when the Romans were going out and conquering the world, the legion was going out, they would go far away from Rome and they would go to the outskirts of the empire and they would go fight the barbarians, the horde, whatever, who they were trying to subdue. And what they would do is they would go far away. That way, if something happened, the battle didn't go their way, the emperor, the general, whoever was in charge of the armies could send a messenger into Rome and kind of run through the countryside and tell them, hey, they're on their way, the horde's coming, batten down the hatches, get prepared, get ready to fight. But if the general had won the battle, they would send a euangelion, a good news message all throughout the land. And they would say, hey, the king has won the battle, peace will reign today. And the name of the messenger was an angelos, which is where we get the term angel from. And that's what happened 2,000 years ago. God sent an angel. He sent a good news messenger to tell us the great teacher is here. No, he said the great king is here. The king is here. Peace will reign today. And that's what the gospel is. The world did not need another teacher. The world does not need another teacher. This is what C.S. Lewis says. He says, there has been no lack of good advice for the last 4,000 years. A bit more would not have made a difference. We have never followed the advice of the great teachers. If Christianity only means one more bit of good advice, then Christianity is of no importance. You see, the most important thing about the gospel, the most important thing about this good news message is that it must be believed and received like a gift. If you are in here today and you're simply just trying to emulate the teachings of Jesus, that doesn't make you a Christian. If you're trying to just emulate the moral teachings of Jesus, even if you're really good at it, that's not what makes you a Christian. The gospel is not about good advice, it's about good news. The core of Christianity is not a set of teachings that we need to follow, it's about a gift that we need to receive. The second thing that Matthew talks about is he mentions, as we read this genealogy, he shows us that God is working in all things, good and bad, for his purposes. I want to jump back to verse 3 for a second. It says, Judah, the father of Perez and Zerah by Tamar. First of all, it's very weird that Matthew would include a woman in a Jewish genealogy. A Jewish genealogy would typically be men because that's where like the patriarchal blessing was passed. It was passed from father to son. And so I think it's interesting that he would add Tamar in here. He adds several women in his genealogy. We'll talk about that in a little bit. But do you know the story of Tamar? I mean, if you have kids right now, you might want to take them to Redemption Kids. Just spoiler alert, this is a PG-13 story. The story of Tamar happens in Genesis 38. J-Will was up here a moment ago, mentioned the story of Joseph. Joseph is sold into slavery, and then there's a random chapter in the middle of Genesis 38, that has nothing to do with the story of Joseph. But God includes this messy, chaotic story so that we can see how he is working in all good and bad situations. I'm just going to kind of talk about it. I don't have time to read the whole chapter. But Tamar, so Judah is mentioned in the genealogy. He has 3 sons, and Tamar is the wife of his oldest son. And the son dies, so Tamar now is a widow. And in those days, if you were a widow without children, it was legally required for you to be married to the next of kin, whether it was the father or the next oldest brother. And so Judah marries Tamar to his next son, Onan. And Onan doesn't really like her. He kind of begrudgingly takes her as his wife. He doesn't really like her. He doesn't want to give her kids because kids are expensive, amen? And so when he and Tamar are together in the bed, he doesn't really seal the deal with her. That's the best way to describe it. Like, here's what it says. Here's the King James version of it. I'm not going to read it out loud. You can read it yourself. That's in the Bible, right? That's in the Bible. I know the story. I didn't remember that actually is in the Bible. That's crazy. If anybody ever tells you the Bible's boring, just show them Genesis 38. This is not boring. This is interesting stuff. Interesting to say the least. So God is upset with Onan, and he kills Onan. And so now Judah is down to one more son. And Judah begins to think, maybe Tamar is the problem here. I don't want to give her away and kill all 3 of my sons. So he just stalls for years. He ends up stalling, and Tamar kind of finds out he's not really going to do this. So what she does is she kind of disguises herself as a prostitute. She seduces Judah, gets him drunk, sleeps with him, and she gets pregnant with her father-in-law. And 3 months go by, and she begins to show, and that's what happens with women. And Judah finds out, and he says, "You're pregnant, and you're not married." He brings her out to like the city officials, the city leaders, and he says, "She's pregnant, don't know who the father is, she needs to die. Who's the father? We're going to kill him too." And Tamar goes, "Well, I have a belt of the man who got me pregnant." She pulls out Judah's belt. And you thought your Thanksgiving dinner was awkward. This is a messy story. This is a chaotic, crazy, weird story. Why is it in the Bible? We see that it's in the Bible because God is working and bringing about his perfection in the ugliness and the messiness of life. And he's working in your life too. When God seems absent, he's not distant. He's working things out. We just read through Malachi together. And we turn the page from Malachi to Matthew. Just one page in our Bible represents 400 years of silence from God. We're like, what is God doing that whole time? Well, he's doing a lot. I don't really have time to get into it, but he's basically setting up the stage. If you think about an act of a play, if you've ever been to like a Broadway play, there's like this, the curtain draws, And everything happens in the background, and we don't quite see it, but then the curtain rises, and everything is set up and ready for the second act. And that's essentially what God does in Malachi to Matthew. There's 400 years of history that actually happened. And as you begin to read history, you realize, wow, God has been working in all of this time throughout all these pagan societies and pagan religions to make sure that his world that he created is ready to receive the message of Jesus. And you are in here today and you might have a messy, dysfunctional family or a messy, dysfunctional life. And I want you to hear me. God was not happy that what happened to you happened to you. He was not pleased with that. He was angry about that. He was angry as much as I would be angry if something happened to one of my children. But God has an overriding purpose in our life, and that is to bring about Jesus' purpose in this world, for his glory and for our good. Romans 8 says it this way: we know that for those who love God, all things work together for good, for those who are called according to his purpose. For those whom he foreknew, he also predestined to be conformed to the image of his Son, in order that he might be the firstborn among many brothers. God was not surprised or taken aback by your story. He knows about that crazy uncle or that crazy grandfather or that crazy family member for years past, that the aunt that ran out on somebody and messed up everything. God knows that. He was not surprised by it, but he's working it out in his time. If we trust him to do that, he will do that. Let me give you one more kind of thing that solidifies this reminder that God is working all things for his glory. Skeptics of the Bible will look at Matthew's genealogy and Luke's genealogy, and they'll say they're different names, they're different lineages. How is this even possible? Well, there's two reasons for that. One is you have to understand the context of who Matthew and Luke are talking to. Matthew's talking to a primarily Jewish audience, and so he begins the genealogy with Abraham, the father of the Jewish faith, and he walks through Abraham's line to Jesus to show the Jewish people that Jesus actually is Jewish, and so he comes from the line of Abraham, so he's the fulfillment of all these Jewish prophecies. And then Luke is talking to a primarily Roman and Greek audience, people that are polytheistic, that have multiple different gods and religions and different things that they believe. And Luke starts from God and brings the lineage all the way down to Jesus. So he's proving to the Greeks, to the Romans, that Jesus actually is God, and this is how he comes from God. But there's more to it than that. You see, in 2 Samuel 7, God promises King David something. He tells David that a blood descendant of David would sit on the throne forever. And the kingly line gets passed down to Solomon and gets passed down through Solomon's son and goes down, and it gets to Jeconiah in Matthew chapter 1, verses, I think, 11. And it says, Jeconiah and his brothers at the time of the deportation to Babylon. Well, what happened was Jeconiah sinned so badly that God basically had to do a hard reset on the nation of Israel. He sends Israel off to Babylon to be captives. And he tells Jeconiah in Jeremiah 22, verse 30, that none of his offspring shall succeed in sitting on the throne of David. So now we have a dilemma. Well, let's enter Luke's genealogy. Luke makes it very clear in chapter 3, verse 31, that Mary is also a descendant of David, another one of his sons, Nathan. In other words, the virgin birth of Jesus through Mary is the only way that both those prophecies would be fulfilled. God keeps his promise to David that a son, that his blood descendant, that his kingly descendant would go down. And so we get to Jesus, and because Joseph, his father, adopts Jesus, Jesus avoids the blood curse that is brought upon Jeconiah. But because Jesus comes from Mary, and Mary is a descendant of David through Nathan, God fulfills his promise in 2 Samuel 7 to David. So he's able to fulfill a promise to David, and then a promise 4 generations later to Jeconiah that was really a curse, and still is able to follow through in all of his promises. That is some cosmic levels of 4D chess right there. That God's able to keep his promises for multiple generations, for hundreds of years down the line. Our God is in control of this world. He's in control of time and space and history. And he brings about all things, good and bad, for his purposes. The final thing that I think Matthew reminds us is that the gospel itself is for the outsider. The gospel itself is is for the outsider. You see, for a Jewish person, their genealogy was basically what we would call a resume today. Your heritage, your lineage, your genealogy was how you showed the world your worth. And for us with resumes, that's kind of how we show the world our worth today. And like then, today, we maybe kind of pull out some of the things that are not so good and we put in some of the things that are good. We maybe embellish a little bit, right? King Herod, who's Herod the Great at the time of Jesus' rule, he's not really the king. He's kind of like set up as like the prefect over Judea by the Romans to keep the crazy Israelites from rebelling consistently. And he sets up King Herod, and Herod's not really king. He's more of like Denethor in The Return of the King, where he's just kind of set up as the king. But to prove he's the king, he puts together his lineage and his genealogy. And scholars come to find out that actually Herod just took out all of the crazy bad actors in his lineage. So it looks like Herod comes from the sheer line of awesomeness, and that's why he's Herod the Great. I told you a few minutes ago, I'm not really into genealogies, but Cassian's uncle is, my wife's uncle is. A couple years ago, he told us that Cassian's great-great-great-great-great-grandfather was Roger Sherman. Cool, who's that? I don't know who that is, right? Roger Sherman is a founding father. And you're like, I didn't read that in history books. I don't remember who that is. Roger Sherman's not really talked about a lot in the history books, but he's very unique in that he's the only founding father to sign all 4 of the great state papers. He signs the Continental Association that forms the Continental Congress. He signs the Declaration of Independence. He signs the Articles of Confederation after the U.S. wins the war against England. And then he signs the Constitution as well. Roger Sherman is in fact the man who told George Washington and Benjamin Franklin, hey, this Thomas Jefferson fella, I've been kind of like taking him under my wing. He's really smart. He should draft the Declaration of Independence. Roger Sherman is the reason why Thomas Jefferson is the one who drafted that. And on July 3rd, 1776, Thomas Jefferson stands up and reads it before the Congress. And as he's getting ready to read it, Roger Sherman stands up and begins to just kind of leave and exit the building. And Thomas Jefferson in front of everybody goes, that man has never said a foolish thing in his life. And so it's like, yeah, whenever we're at dinner parties, we're like, hey, Cassian's great-great-great-great-grandfather is a founding father. I don't know what that means for us, but it's cool. It's a cool like party like story, right? I don't know, and she doesn't know who her great-great-great-great-great-grandfather is. I don't think she knows who her great-great-great-grandfather is. She doesn't know any of that, but she knows him. So it doesn't matter who the other 4 are between her and her grandfather. It's Roger Sherman. And then it's Cassian. Roger Sherman begat Cassian. That's essentially what was happening back then. That's what Herod basically did. He only put people in his lineage who were sheer awesome people that everybody in the Jewish community would know. And yet we look at the genealogy and we see Jesus' genealogy includes a lot of unsavory people, let's just put it that way. We talked about Tamar, talked about that story with Tamar and her father-in-law Judah. We have Rahab in verse 5. She is a prostitute. She's a Gentile in Jericho that God saves. You have Ruth, who is a Moabite. The Moabites are the sworn enemies of Israel. You have in verse 6, David, the wife of Uriah. So like, not only is it women who didn't really matter that much back then, but it's also women who have like some sort of sexual scandal involved with them. It says David and the wife of Uriah. Why that phrase? Why didn't he just say the name? Because he wants to remind us that, hey, the great King David, don't forget what is in his story as well. David takes one of his best friend's wives. He takes her, he sleeps with her, he gets her pregnant, and to cover it up, he kills Uriah. And that's just Jesus' line is filled with all of these outsiders, these moral deviants, these ethnicities that shouldn't have been included but are included. You have women included. I mean, you have 5 women. You have Mary as well, which we know the story of Mary, but back then they didn't. She's a virgin, really, Mary? That's what happened? So you have these 5 women. All of them have some sort of scandal involved with them. You have David, and we remember David. He didn't just say David and Solomon. He says David by the wife of Uriah to remind us that, oh yeah, even the good people that are listed in this genealogy, there's some really bad stuff in that lineage. And that's a reminder to you and me today. It's a message to you and me that the names that are in this line that lead to Jesus are included so that your name can be included in the line that leads from Jesus. It means no matter what you've done, there is room in God's family for you. You may feel like an outsider. You may feel like you've been outcast, but you're not. God has invited you home. He invites you in. You might feel worthless. The things that you've done or the things that have been done to you make you feel worthless. And God's saying, no, I bought you with the universe's most valuable possession, the blood of my son, Jesus. You might think God's plans for you are over. And these stories remind us, this genealogy reminds us that, and your plans are just beginning. God is at work in the ugliest of situations, bringing forth his most beautiful son. In Christ, he takes the ugliness of your life and of my life, and he redeems it for the beauty of his glory. Jesus comes as a gift. That's why we talk about it so much at Christmas time. He comes as a gift to be received. Would you receive him today? He knows your life. He knows your pain, and he goes, I want to enter into that pain and redeem it for my glory. Come to know him today. There's no joy on earth that can sustain you or fill you. You and I, we were created for something more. There is a love and a joy and a peace that is outside of time and space, that has entered into our time and our space. And his name is Jesus. He's the center of history. I mean, we changed the calendar because of him. That's how important Jesus is. When it's all said and done, we had these names, Abraham and Isaac and David and Judah and all these names. At the end of the day, when it's all said and done, they're all going to be sitting in the audience with us, looking at center stage and applauding the only one who matters, Jesus. And he invites you today to become children of God. John 1 says, those who did receive him, who believed in his name, he gave the right to become children of God. You get that opportunity today. If you receive Jesus, you receive this gift, this good news gift.